Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to my shop. Today in Dave's Garage, we're going to pick up right where we left off on our Atari Tempest hacking project. We're at the point right now where we have extracted the binary images from all 10 2K ROMs using an EPROM reader, combined them into one solid 20K program binary, and now we're going to get down to business and start taking it apart piece by piece. Our next step then is to load the 20K binary into EPROM, the disassembler that I'm using for this project. A disassembler is a tool that takes a finished working program and tries to make enough sense of it that it can present you with an assembly source code listing of the program. In theory, you could run that disassembly back through an assembler and get the same program back. Of course, the disassembler doesn't know what to name or call anything, so all the labels are meaningless. And more often than not, you have to go in and manually figure out what pieces of the binary are code and which are data. And that's why I call it a tool. It's something you use, ideally with a little skill, to accomplish a goal. But just like a wrench won't fix a car by itself, a disassembler won't magically produce a useful source code listing without a little sweat equity. I'm going to follow a two-step approach with a disassembler. First, I'm going to do my best to figure out which parts of this ROM are code and which are data. Then I will try to isolate every address reference within the code and the data so that I can replace them with a symbolic reference. What do I mean by that? Let's say you have the little assembly block shown on the screen here. If I were to remove the no-op instruction, which actually does nothing, it would crash. That's because any code after the no-op will now shift up one byte if we rebuild that program. But since the addresses were hard-coded and now everything is shifted, they're wrong. Any reference to code after the no-op are now off by one. We would be jumping to the middle of the next instruction, not its beginning. We'll fix all this using symbolic labels, which will cause the assembler to actually calculate the address properly, even when things move around. But as you can imagine, you can't have a mix of hard-coded and symbolic references. If things are going to move around, it's got to be entirely symbolic. That doesn't just mean you have to find any place where the code references an address, but also in data. Any addresses in data tables must also be made symbolic. It should make a little more sense once you see me actually doing it in the next segment. This is probably the most challenging episode of the Tempest hacking series, because this one was the most complicated work. Once we get the program completely symbolic, the fun can really begin with exploring the program, and after that, we can start to party on it by extending the scores, levels, colors, and more. Before we can do that though, we have some dues to pay, so let's get started. The disassembler I'm going to use is actually EPROM because I have a license for it, because it's old, because I know how to use it, and because that's what I started this project in. I actually played around with, I don't know how you say it, Ghidra this morning, the NSA tool, and it's pretty cool, and it did a pretty good job of its analysis. I know it was much better or different. It's certainly more modern and easier to use than IDA in some ways. I know IDA works, and it already is where the analysis was done when I went through it the first pass, so it's what I'm going to go through and do it with you now. Plus, it's a handy-dandy tool. It's also the most pirated piece of software around, probably. However, I have a license since 2001. I bet you my license is older than some of my viewers. Yeah, in fact, if you are born after June 2001 and you're actually watching a video on assembly language 6502 programming, leave a note in the comments. That's kind of cool. I'd like to hear that. So all we need to do is say File Open, open our concatenated binary file, and we need to tell it what kind of CPU it is. We also know, or I know from having looked at the memory map in the past, that the code actually starts at 9,000. As I think I may have said earlier, the vector and color ROM goes down to 3,000, but the 10 ROMs that we pulled out live from 9,000 to DFFF. So that's where we're going to put them. That should be it. Yes, I do want to change the processor type. Symbol warning, doesn't matter. It's also a symbol warning. I've just loaded a binary. It doesn't know where to start. There's no standard of binaries. When the 6502 starts up, it looks at one of three vectors up at the top of memory. Those are the NMI vector, the reset vector, and the break vector, which is also overloaded as the IRQ vector. What happens is it goes to the reset vector, figures out what 16-bit address is stored there, and that's where the chip begins execution when it boots up. So let's go see what's there. Now, as you can see, our code doesn't even go that far. When you started at 9,000, it only goes, as I said earlier, to DFFF. But what they've done is they've, I believe, rerouted one of the address pins, or just shorted it, basically tied it on the 6502, so that this ROM is copied or mirrored up at all the way to FFFF as well. And so that way, the end of this ROM appears at the end of memory. And the reason they do that is because they just didn't have enough code in memory. If they would have had a couple more ROMs, they could have reached the end of memory, but that would cost money. They didn't need it. They only had this much code. Why they didn't choose to just offset their base and rebuild it, I don't really know. So we want to see these three vectors as 16-bit values. Let's do that by going to them and pressing D to mark them as data, and then D again to mark them as a 2-byte field. There we go. And so we can name these as reset vec. Now we can tell this thing, if we jump to here, we know this is where this is going to start executing. So we can tell the disassembler, disassemble this as code. We do that by pressing C. And we hope that what comes out makes sense. So what the disassembler is going to do is when we mark something as code, it's going to start interpreting the instructions just like a CPU would. It doesn't track any internal state like bit flags or registers or anything like that, but it does decode each instruction, figure out where all the branches could be, keeps track of all the points, and then does a recursive kind of a tree walk through all the possible points of code that it discovers. It's possible that Ghidra does a better job of this, and it's something I'll have to try, is finding references to code in data tables. It's a purely manual process in IDA, so we can now scroll through the code and see where we can find places that it couldn't analyze. Now I know this is not code because it's a break instruction. Yeah, definitely not code. But A9, that's load 0, store it at 60E0 or something like that. So let's mark this as code. Yeah. Load A0, store it, all these addresses. Definitely good code. AD is an indirect load, I think. Or load, yeah, indirect load. E2, I don't know, 0 page. No, load X, I was close. Not at all. That's why I don't do this by hand. Yeah, I have done it by hand a long time ago. And that's why my brain still remembers some of these numbers, which is kind of odd and crazy. First game I ever wrote, I wrote in a machine language monitor because I didn't have an assembler yet. So that was a case of writing it in the hex and also doing the thing where you have to, if you want to add code in the middle, you've got to jump out, jump back, because you can't relocate 6502 code. Not without a symbolic refresh. And we'll get more on that later. Again, this is JSR, so there we go. Code, not sure, not good code. Undo. I don't know what to make of these. These are either addresses or just dead spots in the code, and why there would be dead spots. They could be tables that just got orphaned that the author didn't know he no longer needed, and the assembler doesn't optimize out. Or they just could be references I haven't identified yet, and it somehow accesses those memory locations indirectly in a way that I don't know. Look at that. This is also code. Not code. Well, I mean, it could be code, but it doesn't look very useful. So it's probably not code. But this A9 looks suspicious. Now, so that definitely looks like code, but nobody ever goes there. And I checked, because I remember doing this. DDE9 is not a memory location that's ever referenced directly again or indirectly that I could find. So this is like a part of a jump table that was never used in a way. As we scroll through, again, I'm just looking for more regions of bytes that have not been interpreted. And here we are at the end. So everything that we did from the point where the code resets up to the end of memory is now pretty much marked as code, except for the few data tables. But that's only probably about a fifth of this ROM. Pretty clearly a table of some kind, so we won't mess with that one. This also looks like a bunch of strings, to be honest, because they're all terminated with a 0, and I see a length. Oh, that's not a length. It's some kind of null terminated table, so it's going to be data. We can jump all the way back to the beginning. This is clearly not code. But about here, it looks like it starts to be code, maybe. Yes, indeed you do. This is also code. This is code. Also code. Now, you'll notice we're not spending any time really figuring out what the code does at this point. We're just trying to separate code from data. Because here are the general steps we're going to do. And I'm going to finish this whole code from data thing behind the scenes so you don't have to watch anymore, because I think you get the idea. Our next step is going to go to try to find to be references to addresses so that we can make them symbolic. Because what happens in 6502 is that the address is actually stored in the ROM. So to make 6502 relocatable, we need to find every instance of an address that's referenced in the code and change it to a symbol. We have to go to the address, give it a symbol, and we have to go to wherever it's referenced, including in tables, and change it to be from a hard-coded address to the value of the symbol. That way, we are able to eventually go and move stuff around in the code or take stuff out and have it collapse down, because any change like that now would break the entire thing. As soon as from that point forward, any code is shifted in any way, all the addresses are off by that much, and it just blows up. So 6502, not relocatable at all without a really good analysis by machine or human-assisted disassembly. So we can go and name the reset Location as reset. We'll go and name the NMI vector. Well, first we'll mark it as code because we haven't done that yet, I guess. There we go. And it definitely is an initialization because we can see it pushing A, transferring X to A, pushing that, putting Y in A, pushing that, clearing decimal mode. Looking at the stack, it's checking the stack, blowing up if there's not enough, and then it keeps going if there is. So, looks basically right. Let's actually call this NMI break IRQ, because it appears to be all three things. Now, we can go to this table and click the offset to say don't use a hard-coded address, use the offset, which really is a symbol. Do the same here. We'll do the same here. And there you go. These 3 lines of assembly are now done and fully relocatable. 11,781 left to go. As you can imagine, it takes some time. Let me fast forward again and let you not have to watch 3 weeks of me sitting here and doing this, because it does get a little tedious. And we'll jump right to where we have the disassembly in hand, and we can look at the code, figure out what changes we're going to make and how we're going to make them. Thanks for joining me for this episode. Be sure to like the video if you found it interesting. And if you want to see the next ones, subscribe, turn on the bell, and nowadays you have to apparently turn on personalized recommendations as well by clicking on the bell and picking personalized. That way you will find out when the next episode actually comes out, because it's such a small channel that if you don't do that, you'll probably never see it again. So you don't want to take that kind of crazy risk, do you? See you next time. Bye.